Gannon Stach had already survived once against extraordinary odds. He was born on September 1st, 2008, to Al Stach and Landon Hyatt. At birth, he weighed only 1 pound and 6 ounces. His family was warned that his chance of survival was low. And even if he did survive, they were told he could face profound disabilities. But Gannon fought. He survived those first fragile days, then kept growing beyond the grim expectations his parents had been given. By the time he reached 5th grade, he was bright, gifted, and quietly observant. The tiny premature baby with a 10% chance of survival had become an intelligent 11-year-old who loved video games, loved his family, and could do far more than anyone had once predicted. That was why Landon called him her miracle child. And that description matters, because before Gannon became the face on a missing person flyer, before investigators examined timelines and security footage, he was a real kid with an ordinary life. Family photographs show the version of Gannon that deserves to be remembered. A cheerful boy standing beside the people he loved. A quiet child who did not need to be the loudest person in the room. Someone remembered as kind, thoughtful, and willing to do things for others. He liked playing video games, including his Nintendo Switch. He spent time with his family. And he was the older brother of his younger sister, Lena. Those details can sound small next to everything that happened later, but they are the point. Gannon was not evidence. He was not a case number. He was a son, a brother, and a 5th grader whose family knew his habits well enough to recognize immediately when something was wrong. By January 2020, Gannon was attending Grand Mountain School in El Paso County, Colorado. His family lived in the Lorson Ranch area of Colorado Springs, in a blended household that had taken shape several years earlier. When Gannon was around 7 or 8, his father married Letitia Stach. The marriage took place in 2016. Letitia had a daughter from a previous marriage, Harley Hunt, and the two families became one household. Al served in the Colorado National Guard. His responsibilities sometimes required him to be away from home, leaving Letitia to care for Gannon, Lena, and the other children. On paper, it was the kind of arrangement found in countless military families. One parent traveled for work. The parent at home handled school, appointments, meals, and the ordinary chaos of raising children. Then came Monday, January 27th, 2020. According to the first account given by Letitia, Gannon had been suffering from stomach problems the night before. He stayed home from Grand Mountain School that Monday because he was not feeling well. Nothing about that, by itself, sounded alarming. Children get sick. They miss school. A parent or step-parent stays home with them. The troubling part came later. Letitia said that sometime between approximately 3 and 4 that afternoon, Gannon left the house to visit a friend. She said the friend lived somewhere nearby, only a few streets away in the neighborhood. But she could not identify which friend. She could not provide the exact house. According to that initial version, an 11-year-old who had been too sick to attend school had recovered enough to leave the house alone. He had supposedly gone to see someone in the neighborhood without clearly telling Letitia where he was going. Then the afternoon passed, darkness came, and Gannon did not return. For Al, that was immediately out of character. The family followed what he called the streetlight rule. When the streetlights came on, or when it became dark, the children were expected to be home. Gannon was not known for wandering away. He was not the kind of child who would casually disappear for hours without checking in. At first, the family tried the obvious things. They contacted friends Gannon was known to visit. They asked whether anyone had seen him. Nobody had. The streetlights were on. Another 30 minutes passed. Still nothing. At approximately 6:55 that evening, Gannon was reported missing. His cell phone remained inside the family home. That meant no one could call him and expect him to answer. Investigators could not simply use the phone as a direct line to Gannon or as an easy way to determine where he had gone. If he was outside somewhere, he was out there without the device that might have allowed him to ask for help. And this was Colorado in January. Temperatures could become dangerously cold after sunset, especially for a child who had supposedly left for a short visit and had no reason to prepare for a night outdoors. Gannon was only 11. He was believed to be on foot. A snowstorm was approaching, with forecasts warning that as much as 6 inches could fall. Every hour mattered. The first public reports presented the case in the simplest terms available at that moment. An 11-year-old boy had left home to visit a friend and had not come back.
Happening now, a family needs your help to find an 11-year-old boy who authorities say ran away.
The El Paso County Sheriff's Office tells us that Gannon Stach was last seen by his family on Monday He said he was going to a friend's house.
And News 5's Jessica Bretto is joining us from the sheriff's office with what we know about Gannon. Jessica.
Good morning, Bree and Ira. Well, Gannon is still missing, but we're told people have been searching for him since Monday night, and they've covered a lot of ground already in and around that boy's neighborhood. They've been searching all over Lorson Ranch, Fountain, and beyond. They've been posting flyers like this around their neighborhood, also online. All these efforts to bring Gannon home. Now, Gannon's father tells News 5 that this all started when he took off for a friend's house on Monday at about 3:30 p.m. Within a few hours, he says his wife knew something was wrong when Gannon didn't come home. Eventually, the police were called in to help.
He's not really the type to walk off. It's like, where could he be?
So I'm urging anyone that has any leads, credible leads, if you're too afraid because you know something, a kid just doesn't disappear and no one sees him. It's not how this works. So if you have anything that's credible, if you're afraid, don't worry about it. Imagine my son, how afraid he is.
When Gannon was born, he weighed only 1 pound and 6 ounces, and even today, he's still our miracle child. He still is.
I'm Landon Hyatt, Gannon's mom, and I encourage you guys, I know many of you mothers and fathers, I encourage you just to find him. I'm so thankful for all the outpouring help that this case has brought. My son is a very loving kid. He wouldn't want harm on anybody at all. And it's so hard to just think, why is this happening to him? I have no clue, but my kid deserves to come home. My kid has a purpose. My kid has a life. And it's important to me. And it's important to everybody that's standing in this room. Gannon, Bubba, little man, mommy's hero, wherever you're at. Mommy and Daddy's here. We're begging and pleading for you to come home.
Investigators checked camera after camera for an 11-year-old walking toward a friend's house. There was no trace of that journey. No doorbell camera caught Gannon leaving the neighborhood. No security system showed him moving from one street to another. No confirmed witness remembered seeing him outside. And the friend he was supposedly visiting said Gannon had never arrived. That did not prove what had happened to him, but it left investigators with a basic problem. The only account of Gannon walking away from home could not be verified by anyone or anything. The search continued anyway. Monday night became Tuesday. Tuesday became Wednesday. Then Thursday arrived, and volunteers were still moving through the Colorado cold, looking along roads, through open spaces, and around the surrounding neighborhood. Law enforcement deployed extensive resources. Drones searched from above. People on foot looked for clothing, personal belongings, footprints. Anything that could establish where Gannon had gone. His cell phone was still at home, so investigators could not call him, track a live signal, or wait for him to reach out. If he was outside without proper winter clothing, every hour mattered. A snowstorm was approaching, with forecasts warning that as much as 6 inches could fall. Snow could reduce his chances of surviving exposure. It could also cover whatever physical trace he might have left behind. Still, there was nothing. No clothing, no confirmed sighting. No evidence that Gannon had reached a friend's house. He seemed to have disappeared inside a neighborhood filled with cameras and people searching specifically for him. At first, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office handled the report under its policy for missing children aged 10 and older. Unless evidence indicated an abduction or another immediate danger, such cases could initially be classified as runaways. But that label never fit what Gannon's family knew about him. Al explained that the children followed a streetlight rule. When the lights came on or darkness fell, they came home. Gannon was not known for simply wandering off. By the time he was about 30 minutes late, Al was already contacting the friends Gannon might have visited. None of them had seen him. As the hours passed without evidence supporting the runaway explanation, authorities upgraded Gannon's status to an endangered missing child. That change mattered. It reflected what the search was beginning to show. Investigators did not have a child known to have run away. They had an 11-year-old whose last confirmed movements remained uncertain. At a press conference, Gannon's biological mother, Landon Hyatt, kept the focus on her son. She called him Bubba, little man, and mommy's hero. She reminded everyone that he had entered the world weighing only 1 pound and 6 ounces and had survived when doctors gave him a 10% chance. Now she was asking strangers to help him survive again. Her plea was direct. Gannon had a life. He had a purpose. He deserved to come home. Landon asked anyone with information to imagine being in her position and to report even the smallest lead. Around that appeal, though, a second conversation was growing. Online groups began dissecting the case. Rumors spread about Letitia Stotch, the last adult known to have been with Gannon. Some people claimed she was not cooperating. Others treated gaps in her account as proof that she had harmed him. Those were accusations, not evidence. Missing child cases produce speculation quickly, especially when the public has only fragments of a timeline. A person's tone, posture, or response to criticism cannot establish guilt. Investigators were gathering something more useful. They were checking cameras, interviewing friends, comparing reported times with observable movements. And none of that work had produced support for Letitia's original claim that Gannon had walked to an unidentified friend's home sometime between roughly 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock that Monday afternoon. With suspicion growing, Letitia agreed to speak outside the family home. This was her opportunity to address the search, explain what she knew, and speak directly to the child she said she wanted returned.
You are?
I am Tisha Stout, which is Gannon's stepmother.
You've been a part of the investigation since the very first time. You were the last person to see him. Is that right?
Correct.
What did you see when you last saw him?
Well, I'm not allowed to talk about anything with the case. I would more so be willing to talk about how the community needs to have faith and continue to work together and not make these false accusations, like the things that have been said that I've disappeared from the community. I haven't been there to help, but there's lots of reasons behind that.
Reasons like death threats, right?
Right. Death threats are one of them. My family's getting lots of death threats. We counted over 20 some death threats already. 2, my husband's ex-wife is living in our home, and of course I'm not coming home to do these things and to help with the family when I was kind of like told I couldn't. And then many other things that happened with the El Paso County Police Department, you know, and in doing the investigation I was told I wasn't compliant. And could I elaborate on that?
Please do.
Yes. So I asked for an attorney during the interview, and I was denied that by them. I was held because they were blocking the door, and I was told I couldn't leave, and that if I would have touched them, they would have probably, said I still wasn't complying, or said I was, trying to run away or something.
I'm going to shift gears to what has become a huge online presence of people obviously trying to do the right thing, help find Gannon. But at the same time, sometimes it just feels like rumor mongering. Have you seen any of those comments yourself?
We have. And see, that's one of the main things we haven't been around in the public eye, because I didn't want to expose my family to it if all these things were going on. There was comments about Gannon getting pushed off the hike, and there was comments about this, and that's just not true. I took care of Gannon for the last 2 years in our home because his mother didn't want to do it. And I would never, ever hurt this child. And I know there's some questions out there about, okay, so tell me what happens. That's up to the investigations when they end up letting you guys know, but I've cooperated with them. The rumors have gotten so bad. I pretty much have been told at least 10 different ways that these people have these conspiracy theories. I guess they watch a lot of law shows, and maybe they have all these theories on how Gannon is dead, and that's what they're saying. So I'm like, why are you saying Gannon is dead? He is not dead. We are going to find Gannon. I am going to be so ecstatic when I'm able to say to people that I hope they have a really sincere apology for all these theories that have came out online, for all the things they said that I have done or people have done. And I just want everyone to know that we're going to find Gannon. And I love him so much. I've helped taking care of him for so long.
I feel like I asked you what I need to. Do you feel like this is going to help kind of turn the tide of what feels like a witch hunt, in my opinion?
I hope. Am I on camera now?
You are still.
Okay. I think that a lot of people can see that I'm not missing and see that I am being cooperative. But to me, it's okay that they think those things, because the way someone thinks about me, I don't have a problem with that. My main thing is I would never want someone to think that I would hurt Gannon or any of the children in our home, because that's just not the case.
Any message for Gannon?
The message for Gannon I have is, Gannon, when you get here, you'll be able to truly tell what happened. And then I really hope I get a sincere apology from everyone who has made all those things.
A missing child case became a homicide investigation, one room at a time. The wall, the mattress, the carpet, the concrete beneath it, the garage, and finally, the rear of an SUV. By the time Letitia Stotch was arrested on March 2nd, investigators had developed a reconstruction that looked nothing like the story of Gannon walking to a friend's house. Their theory, laid out in the arrest affidavit and later advanced by prosecutors, was that Gannon had never left home voluntarily that afternoon. They believed a violent event occurred inside his bedroom at approximately 2:14 p.m. on January 27th. That distinction matters. At this stage, the affidavit was presenting the investigators' conclusions based on the evidence they had gathered. It was not yet a jury verdict, but the physical trail inside the Stotch home was becoming difficult to explain as anything other than a crime scene. Investigators found blood spatter on the walls of Gannon's bedroom. Near the southeast corner was a large stained area. The blood had not stopped at the surface of the room. It had soaked into the mattress area, passed through the carpet and carpet padding, and left staining on the concrete beneath the bed. Think about what that means for a second. This was not one isolated spot that could easily be attributed to a small cut. The evidence continued downward through multiple layers of the room. Investigators believed it showed that Gannon had suffered substantial blood loss where his bed stood. And once they reached that conclusion, the entire day had to be examined again. Not through Letitia's explanations, but through records that did not depend on her memory. Phone data, text messages, photographs, receipts, body camera footage. Those records began before sunrise. Gannon had reportedly been suffering from stomach problems during Sunday night, and Letitia notified his school that he would not be attending on Monday. She also told Al that she planned to remain home with him. In a message to Al, she said she would give her employer an excuse and stay with Gannon. At 4:37 that morning, she sent that excuse. But she did not tell her employer that her sick 11-year-old needed supervision. Instead, she claimed that her stepfather had been struck by a vehicle and killed, meaning she could not come to work. It was an extraordinary lie to tell when the truth. At least the truth she was giving Al and the school would have been perfectly ordinary. A child was sick. His caregiver needed to stay home. No invented death was required. Why create one? The affidavit could document the message, but it could not read her mind. What it did establish was that hours before Gannon was reported missing, Letitia was already giving different people different explanations for why she would not be where she was expected to be. At approximately 8 o'clock a.m., Letitia took photographs of Gannon in bed. His Nintendo Switch was beside him. Those images became important for two reasons. First, they helped establish that Gannon was inside the house that morning. Second, they preserved a view of his bed before police arrived later that night. Keep that bedding in mind. We are coming back to it. The hours that followed were reconstructed through a combination of surveillance footage, phone records, witness accounts, and the evidence recovered from the house. Investigators ultimately placed the suspected violent event at around 2:14 that afternoon. Then, at approximately 3:15 p.m., Gannon's sister Lina came home from school. In a recorded forensic interview, Lina told investigators that Letitia said Gannon was sleeping in Letitia's bed. Lina was not allowed to see him. Instead, Letitia told her to go outside and play. That detail is easy to pass over, but it matters. By then, the person who had supposedly remained home to care for Gannon was not merely saying he was asleep. She was controlling who could enter the room and who could verify that he was there. 40 minutes later, at 3:55 p.m., Al sent a message to his son's phone. "Hey, buddy." 2 words. Nothing unusual. Just a father checking in. Investigators believed Gannon was already dead when that message arrived. It was not marked as read until 7:40 p.m. And Gannon's phone had remained at the house on the night he was reported missing, so Gannon did not see it. Someone else appears to have opened that message more than 3 hours later, while the search for him was beginning. The records established when it was read. They could not, by themselves, identify the hand holding the phone. Then came another timestamp. At 4:52 p.m., Letitia contacted her daughter, Harley Hunt, and asked her to purchase carpet cleaner, trash bags, and baking soda. Harley completed the errand, and investigators recovered a receipt documenting the purchase. Now, this needs to be stated clearly. Harley was not charged with taking part in Gannon's death. The available account of the case treated this as an errand she performed at her mother's request, without evidence that she understood what investigators would later believe those supplies were connected to. But in the timeline, the purchase was significant. Investigators believed a violent event had occurred in a carpeted bedroom shortly after 2 o'clock. Less than 3 hours later, Letitia requested carpet cleaner, trash bags, and baking soda. Viewed alone, those are household products. Viewed beside the blood beneath Gannon's bed, they became part of something much darker. And then police arrived. Body camera footage from the first response captured the condition of the house before investigators fully understood what they were looking at. Letitia's Volkswagen SUV had been backed into the garage. The direction of the vehicle mattered because its rear hatch was positioned over an area where Gannon's blood was later detected on the garage floor. Later luminol testing also produced a presumptive indication of blood around the SUV's rear bumper. Luminol is useful because it can react to blood that has been cleaned or is not visible to the naked eye. But it is a screening tool, not a name tag. A positive reaction can indicate the possible presence of blood. Additional testing is needed to determine what the substance is and, where possible, whose blood it was. That difference is important here. Some vehicle findings were presumptive reactions during the investigation. Other recovered samples were later connected to Gannon. They should not all be described as if they carried exactly the same forensic weight. Even with that caution, the physical arrangement was striking. Blood in the bedroom. Blood associated with the garage. A vehicle backed inside with its rear hatch over the relevant area. And a possible blood reaction on the rear bumper. Investigators believed they were looking at a route. From the bedroom, through the house, into the garage, and then into the Volkswagen. The body camera footage preserved something else. Gannon's bed. The pillows and blankets visible when officers entered did not match the bedding shown in Letitia's photographs from around 8 o'clock that morning. The bed had changed. Investigators searched the family home repeatedly for the original pillows and blankets seen in those photographs. According to the affidavit, they looked 5 separate times. They never recovered them. Maybe no single change in bedding proves a murder. Beds are stripped, blankets are moved, laundry gets done. But this was not an ordinary room anymore. Investigators had found blood spatter on its walls and staining that had passed through the carpet pad to the concrete. The missing bedding was therefore not an isolated oddity. It was a missing part of the scene. The prosecution's eventual reconstruction was that after Gannon was killed, Letitia cleaned the bedroom, removed bloodied materials, moved his remains through the house, and loaded them into the rear of her Volkswagen. Investigators believed the vehicle was then used to conceal or dispose of his remains. And the next morning, Letitia made a decision that brought the SUV into even sharper focus. On January 28th, the day after Gannon was reported missing, she rented a 2019 Kia Rio from Avis. She then used the Kia to pick up Al from the airport and bring him home. Meanwhile, the family's Volkswagen remained in short-term parking at Colorado Springs Airport until approximately 7 o'clock that evening. Letitia returned the Kia the following day. Investigators found no evidence that the Volkswagen had broken down. There was no known mechanical problem preventing it from being driven. Nothing in the records offered an obvious practical reason to rent another car for such a short period. But investigators did see a reason connected to the crime. Their theory was that the Volkswagen had already been used to transport Gannon's remains and could still contain blood, other physical evidence, or possibly Gannon himself at the time Letitia needed to collect Al. If that was true, she could not risk putting Gannon's father inside it, so she arrived in a rental instead. That did not prove the theory by itself. Renting a car is not a crime. Leaving another vehicle at an airport is not a crime. But again, the decision did not stand alone. It sat beside the blood evidence, the missing bedding, the cleaning supplies, and the placement of the SUV in the garage. The Volkswagen became one of the most important pieces of physical evidence in the case. Investigators interviewed Letitia on January 29th. By then, they had obtained a warrant for the SUV. It was seized from her at the interview and towed to an evidence facility where forensic examiners could search it under controlled conditions. The examination identified possible traces of blood in several areas: the rear of the vehicle, the rear passenger seat, the front passenger seat, and a section near the glove box. As with the earlier luminol reaction, the wording matters. Investigators were dealing with different kinds of observations and tests. Some were preliminary indications of possible blood. Other evidence developed later was specifically associated with Gannon, but the overall sequence was becoming hard to ignore. The bedroom suggested a violent event and an attempt to clean it. The different bedding suggested items had been removed before police arrived. The shopping receipt documented a request for cleaning and disposal supplies. The garage connected the house to the Volkswagen. The vehicle's position placed its rear hatch above an area where Gannon's blood was detected. Presumptive testing indicated possible blood on parts of the SUV itself, and the unexplained Kia rental kept Al away from that Volkswagen the following morning. One room had led to another, then to the garage, then to the vehicle. This was no longer a case built around the absence of an 11-year-old on neighborhood cameras. Investigators now had a physical sequence inside the place where he was last known to be alive. And that sequence contradicted the original story at every step. A child who voluntarily walked to a friend's house did not explain blood soaking through carpet padding and staining concrete. It did not explain why his bedding disappeared. It did not explain the cleaning supplies. It did not explain his blood in the garage. And it did not explain why a working SUV was suddenly left at the airport while his stepmother rented another car to collect his father. By the investigators' reconstruction, Gannon had never been missing in the ordinary sense. There had been no unexplained walk into the neighborhood. The disappearance itself was part of the cover-up. Now Letitia had to account for the room, the blood, the missing bedding, and the vehicle. When detectives asked her to do that, she did not offer one corrected story. She introduced an armed stranger named Eduardo, and that was only the first replacement. The stranger in Letitia's next story had no last name, no verifiable identity, and no reason to be inside her home except a damaged patch of carpet. His name, she said, was Eduardo. On January 29th, investigators interviewed Letitia about Gannon's disappearance. By then, the original story was already under serious pressure. Gannon had supposedly left to visit a neighborhood friend, yet cameras had not recorded him making that trip. The friend had not seen him, and physical evidence inside the Stotch home pointed toward something far more violent, so Letitia changed the story. This was no minor correction about a time or a misunderstood conversation. She abandoned the claim that Gannon had independently walked away and replaced it with an allegation involving an armed attacker. According to Letitia, she met Eduardo on January 26th, one day before Gannon was reported missing. She described him generally as a Hispanic construction worker with brown hair and brown eyes. She could not provide a surname or enough identifying information for investigators to verify who he was. She claimed the meeting happened after Gannon knocked over a candle and burned the carpet. Letitia said she drove through an area where homes were under construction, found Eduardo working there, and asked whether he could repair the damage. Then came the part that was difficult to accept even before investigators compared it with the evidence. Letitia said she gave this man the code to the family's garage. The arrangement, according to her, was that Eduardo would enter the home and fix the carpet while she went shopping the following day. And on that following day, January 27th, Eduardo supposedly did far more than repair anything. Letitia alleged that he entered the residence, held her at gunpoint or attacked her, and abducted Gannon. Think about the scale of that claim. This was no longer a child staying out too late. Letitia was now describing a home invasion, an armed assault, and the kidnapping of an 11-year-old boy. But she had not reported any of those things when deputies first arrived. She did not immediately call 911 and say an armed man had entered the house. She did not tell dispatchers that she had been attacked. She did not warn officers that a violent stranger had taken Gannon and might still be nearby. Instead, hours passed. Then she reported that Gannon had gone to a friend's house and failed to return. That contradiction sat at the center of the interview. If Eduardo existed, why protect his presence by inventing a completely different disappearance? Why send officers looking for a child who had supposedly walked through the neighborhood when, according to this new version, she knew he had been abducted? And then there was the carpet. Letitia had already brought up a burned section of carpet in her public explanations. She had also described Gannon cutting his foot in the garage and sitting near the family vehicle while she bandaged him. In that same public statement, she insisted investigators possessed information they had not released. She referred vaguely to a person Gannon had left with, evidence on her phone, shadows around the truck, and facts that supposedly supported her account. At the time, it sounded defensive and confusing. After the January 29th interview, it looked more significant. The burned carpet now created a reason for Eduardo to enter the home. The cut foot created a possible explanation for blood in the garage or around the vehicle. And Letitia was discussing those possible explanations before the public knew investigators had detected blood. Authorities interpreted that as an attempt to get ahead of the forensic evidence. In other words, rather than explain blood after investigators confronted her with it, she appeared to be planting innocent reasons for why it might eventually be found. The interview did not end with Letitia providing a clear description of Eduardo or helping investigators locate him. It ended with her wanting to leave. Investigators seized her phone and detained her while they sought legal authority to collect DNA. During that period, Letitia began stuffing tissues into her clothing. She then complained of chest pain and shortness of breath. Investigators called for medical assistance. Paramedics from the Colorado Springs Fire Department arrived, and Letitia was taken to a hospital. She was not formally in custody at the hospital. That distinction matters. But investigators later described her conduct there as evasive and her departure as escape-like. Rather than remain available for testing that could potentially support her allegation of an attack, she left. That did not prove Eduardo was fictional. It did, however, raise the obvious question. If she had been assaulted, why avoid the very process that might document it? Meanwhile, investigators kept following the vehicles. After they seized Letitia's Volkswagen, she rented a Nissan Altima. Law enforcement obtained authorization to install a GPS tracker and monitor where the rental went. The tracker recorded a trip north toward Palmer Lake and the South Perry Park Road area along Highway 105 in Douglas County. Investigators knew of no family, friends, work, or legitimate business that would explain Letitia's presence there. When they searched the area, they found a piece of particle board bearing Gannon's blood. That discovery gave the trip a very different meaning. The prosecution's later theory was that Letitia had previously used the area as a disposal site, then returned in the Altima during daylight. Investigators believed she may have wanted to inspect the location, make sure nothing could be seen from the road, further conceal evidence, or check for police activity. That purpose was an investigative inference, not something Letitia admitted. But the location, the unexplained return, and the blood-stained particle board gave authorities a physical link between Gannon and a place Letitia had visited after her SUV was taken. Then Al Stotch gave investigators something else, recorded phone calls beginning on February 13th. In those conversations, Letitia did not settle on the Eduardo account. She produced 4 materially different versions of what had happened. In the first, the abductor was supposedly still inside the Stotch residence when deputies arrived on January 27th. Letitia claimed she tried to signal to the officers that someone else was in the house. But deputies had searched the residence for Gannon. They found no hidden attacker and saw no evidence supporting that scenario. In the second version, Eduardo disappeared from the story. The attacker was now Quincy Brown, a wanted fugitive. Letitia claimed Brown assaulted her and abducted Gannon. She said she learned his identity from an ID or document that fell from his pocket, then sent Al an internet screenshot showing Brown listed as a wanted suspect. The third version kept Quincy Brown but changed how he entered the story. This time, he allegedly followed Letitia from Petco, lay in the roadway in front of her vehicle, and climbed inside when she stopped to avoid hitting him. He then forced her to drive him back to the house. And in version 4, the setting moved away from the residence entirely. Letitia said she and Gannon had been near County Line Road and Highway 105. Gannon was riding a bicycle, fell, and struck his head. Then Quincy Brown abducted him. This version introduced another man named Terrence, who was supposedly driving Brown. One day. 4 accounts. An attacker hidden inside the home. An assault by a fugitive identified through a dropped document. A roadside ambush beginning near Petco. Then a bicycle accident and abduction near Highway 105. Every version seemed to change just enough to incorporate a new problem. Al heard it happening in real time. He pointed out that she had changed her story again. Details about Gannon's cut foot, burned arms, bleeding, and the alleged assault were appearing, disappearing, or shifting. He asked her directly whether she had hurt Gannon, whether she had killed him. Letitia denied it and reacted as though the question itself were an offense. But Al did not back away. He demanded an explanation for the significant amount of blood discovered in Gannon's bedroom, including beneath his bed. Letitia said she did not know how it got there. That exchange is difficult to hear because Al was doing 2 things at once. He was speaking to his wife, someone with whom he had built a home and a family. At the same time, he was trying to extract truthful information from the last person known to have been caring for his missing son. He could not afford to treat the call as a normal marital argument. Gannon was still missing. Every changed detail could matter. The digital evidence added another layer. Letitia's Google history included repeated complaints about caring for her stepchildren and feeling like a babysitter rather than a partner. There were searches reflecting resentment toward Al, dissatisfaction with the marriage, and interest in finding another husband. There were also practical searches tied directly to the developing case. How to repair burned carpet, the effects of smoke exposure, whether a sick child could remain home alone, procedures involving a runaway or missing child, flights, Volkswagen services, and whether a Nintendo Switch could be located. Not every angry marital search proves motive. People type bitter, impulsive things into search engines every day without committing a crime. Prosecutors did not need each phrase to stand alone as evidence of murder. They used the pattern. Taken together, they argued, the searches showed resentment over childcare, concern about the carpet and smoke, awareness of missing child procedures, and attention to the devices and vehicles investigators might track. The value was not in one frustrated sentence. It was in how the subjects changed as the case unfolded. Then investigators found something that almost sounds too absurd to be real. Letitia had repeatedly contacted Polygraph. Calm because she was waiting for the results of a privately arranged report. The company provided a form of purported polygraph service, but management had blocked her report because the questions implicated possible illegal activity. Investigators contacted the company and obtained the relevant questions and the answers Letitia had submitted. Had she participated in any way in causing harm to her stepson? She answered no. Had her stepson returned home with her? She answered yes. Had she participated in any way in causing his death? Again, she answered no. Even outside a police interview, she was trying to create something that looked like independent verification. But the company itself refused to issue the report. By late February, investigators were no longer testing one alternative explanation. They were documenting a pattern in which each new story attempted to absorb the evidence exposed by the previous one. The lies could support an arrest, but they could not answer the question tormenting Gannon's family. Where was he? The answer would come from beneath a Florida bridge, roughly 1,400 miles from home. For nearly 2 months, search teams concentrated on Colorado. A construction worker in Florida ended the search by finding a suitcase beneath a bridge. But before anyone knew where Gannon was, investigators made the move they had been building toward since his stepmother's stories began falling apart. On March 2nd, 2020, Letitia Stotch was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The charges were first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence. All felonies. And the wording of those charges made the investigators' position unmistakable. They no longer believed Gannon had walked away, met an unknown friend, or been abducted by Eduardo, Quincy Brown, or any other stranger introduced through Letitia's shifting accounts. They believed Gannon was dead. They believed Letitia had killed him, and they believed she had moved and concealed his body afterward. There was one painful complication, though. At that point, investigators still had not recovered Gannon. His family had an arrest, but they did not have the one answer they had been begging for since January 27th. Where was he? Letitia's arrest in South Carolina also meant Colorado authorities could not simply collect her and drive away. She had been arrested in one state for charges filed in another. That required an extradition process. The legal mechanism used to return a defendant to the state where the criminal case is pending. Her initial South Carolina court appearance was not a trial. The judge was not deciding whether she had murdered Gannon, weighing the blood evidence, or ruling on any of her stories. The issue was much narrower: her identity, the out-of-state warrant, and whether she would challenge her return to Colorado. Letitia waived extradition. That meant she would not force Colorado to complete the longer formal process of securing a governor's warrant before transporting her back. The murder case itself remained untouched. Waiving extradition was not an admission of guilt. It simply cleared the legal path for her return. That distinction matters when you watch the brief courtroom exchange. This was not yet the confrontation over what happened inside Gannon's bedroom. It was the procedural step required to send Letitia back to the jurisdiction accusing her of killing him.
Okay, is this Miss Staunch? South? I knew whichever way I went I'd be wrong, but okay. I don't know how much you know about the extradition proceeding. Do you know anything about extradition?
The 2023 trial began with an unusual point of agreement. Letitia Stotch had killed Gannon. The dispute was whether she understood that what she was doing was wrong. That distinction matters. By pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, Letitia was not asking jurors to decide whether someone else had committed the murder. Both sides agreed that she caused Gannon's death. The jury's job was narrower, but no less difficult. Determine whether, at the time of the killing, she met Colorado's legal standard for insanity. In plain language, did a mental disease or defect leave her unable to understand the nature and consequences of what she was doing? Or unable to distinguish right from wrong? That is a legal question as much as a medical one. A person can have a diagnosed mental health condition and still be legally responsible for a crime. The presence of symptoms, trauma, anxiety, or a personality disorder does not automatically establish insanity. The condition must have affected that person in a specific way at the specific time of the offense. And so, after years of forensic testing, searches, interviews, and shifting explanations, the trial came down to one central question. What was happening in Letitia's mind when she killed Gannon? The defense argued that her mental state could not be understood without examining her childhood. According to her attorneys, Letitia had experienced serious trauma that later developed into dissociative identity disorder, sometimes called D, and historically known as multiple personality disorder. Dissociative identity disorder is a recognized but complex diagnosis. It can involve disruptions in memory, identity, awareness, and a person's sense of self. It is also important to be precise here. This trial was not about whether people with D, anxiety, or any other mental illness are generally dangerous. Mental illness does not make someone violent. The issue was whether Letitia herself had that condition, whether her reported symptoms were genuine, and whether those symptoms made her legally insane when Gannon was killed. The defense said they did. Their theory was that Letitia experienced a psychotic break. In that state, they argued, she was not consciously deciding to murder her stepson. She believed she was confronting demons connected to trauma from her past. Her actions, in the defense's telling, were not those of a rational person who understood that she was killing Gannon. The prosecution saw something entirely different. Prosecutors asked jurors to look beyond what Letitia later said about her mind and focus on what she actually did before and after the killing. She cleaned the house. She moved Gannon's body. She made a false missing child report. She changed her account repeatedly. She rented vehicles when her own vehicle was connected to the evidence. She returned to an area investigators believed had been used to conceal evidence. She searched for information related to missing and runaway children. And she tried to purchase fake polygraph results. Those were not disconnected moments. Together, prosecutors argued they formed a sustained cover-up. Think about that distinction. Legal insanity concerns whether someone could understand that an act was wrong, but concealment can suggest exactly that understanding. A person hides evidence because the evidence points back to them. They invent an abductor because the truth would expose them. They move a body because leaving it in place would reveal what happened. The prosecution's position was simple. Letitia's behavior showed that she understood the consequences from the beginning. Her changing stories mattered for the same reason. Eduardo, Quincy Brown, a stranger inside the house, an attacker from Petco, a bicycle accident followed by an abduction. Prosecutors did not present those versions as the confused recollections of someone detached from reality. They presented them as attempts to find one explanation that investigators might accept. The defense, however, argued that the confusion itself was evidence. The contradictions, bizarre claims, and fragmented narratives could be interpreted as signs of dissociation and psychosis. So the same conduct sat at the center of two opposing psychological portraits. To the defense, the disorder explained the chaos. To the prosecution, manipulation explained it better. One of the prosecution's important witnesses was the mental health director at the El Paso County Jail. She testified about her conversations with Letitia shortly after the arrest, on March 5th, 2020. Before Gannon's remains were recovered in Florida, Letitia reportedly said that she had no mental health problems, not mild problems, not undiagnosed symptoms she was struggling to explain. According to the testimony, she denied having mental health issues. She continued making similar statements during follow-up meetings throughout March. Then Gannon was found. Once his remains had been recovered and the physical evidence against Letitia had become much harder to escape, prosecutors said her presentation changed. She began raising mental health concerns and requesting evaluations. To the state, the timing was revealing. Her insanity claim had not appeared at the beginning, when she was first meeting with jail staff. It developed after the case against her became clearer. That did not, by itself, prove she was faking. People may disclose trauma gradually. Symptoms can be hidden, misunderstood, or denied. But prosecutors argued that this was part of a broader pattern. When one explanation stopped working, Letitia produced another. Forensic psychologist Dr. Jackie Grimmett evaluated Letitia in December 2020. During that evaluation, Letitia reported bizarre experiences, including claims involving vampires. Dr. Grimmett acknowledged that Letitia showed traits associated with borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. But having personality traits or even a personality disorder is not the same as being legally insane. Dr. Grimmett concluded that Letitia exaggerated many of her reported symptoms. Other testimony for the prosecution also highlighted how her mental health history seemed to shift depending on when she was asked. At one point, she said she had never received treatment. At another, She described treatment in Canada and elsewhere. The state's experts did not say there was nothing psychologically wrong with her. Their conclusion was more specific. Whatever personality disorder or other difficulties she may have had, they believed she remained legally sane when she killed Gannon. The defense then offered its own clinical evidence. One witness had treated Letitia before the crime in December 2019 and prescribed hydroxyzine for anxiety. That treatment established that Letitia had sought help before Gannon's death, rather than inventing every mental health concern after her arrest. But its legal significance was limited. Anxiety is common, and treatment for anxiety does not indicate that a person cannot distinguish right from wrong. It certainly does not, by itself, explain violence. The defense needed to establish something far more severe. That brought them to Dr. Dorothy Lewis. Dr. Lewis was the defense's principal expert on dissociative identity disorder. After examining Letitia and reviewing material connected to the case, she concluded that Letitia displayed signs of dissociation, psychosis, and multiple identities. One of those identities was called Maria. Dr. Lewis described changes in Letitia's manner, including a different accent and a more aggressive, frightening presentation when the Maria identity emerged. She also described portions of Letitia's account as confused, incoherent, and psychotic. In Dr. Lewis's opinion, Maria, not Letitia's primary identity, committed the killing. That conclusion went directly to the legal question before the jury. Dr. Lewis believed Letitia was psychotic at the time, was not in contact with reality, and did not understand the difference between right and wrong. She questioned whether Letitia even understood what she was doing to Gannon as it happened. This was the strongest version of the defense case. If Dr. Lewis was correct, the lies and contradictions could be symptoms of a fractured identity rather than deliberate deception. Letitia's bizarre behavior would not necessarily be a calculated performance. It could reflect a person whose memory, perception, and identity had broken apart. But then the jury had to place that interpretation beside the prosecution's timeline. Even if dissociation explained the killing, what explained everything afterward? Letitia did not merely leave the scene in confusion. According to the state's evidence, she cleaned Gannon's room, replaced or removed bedding, requested carpet cleaner, trash bags, and baking soda, moved his remains, repositioned vehicles, filed a false report, and began constructing alternative suspects. Then she kept going. She gave investigators explanations for blood before the public knew blood had been found. She rented vehicles. She returned to the area near South Perry Park Road. She searched for procedures involving runaway and missing children. She tried to obtain a manufactured polygraph report containing denials of harming or killing Gannon. That required decisions made over hours, days, and weeks. The prosecution argued that those decisions had a consistent purpose: place distance between Letitia and the crime. Every new story moved responsibility onto someone else. Every cleaning effort reduced the evidence left behind. Every transportation decision made Gannon harder to find. The defense answered that extreme, chaotic violence itself supported the possibility of a psychotic break. What happened to Gannon, they argued in closing, was so disordered and excessive that it did not resemble rational conduct. Combined with Dr. Lewis's diagnosis and Letitia's reported identities, the brutality pointed toward a mind overtaken by psychosis. The prosecution warned jurors not to confuse brutality with legal insanity. A crime can be horrifying and still be intentional. Violence does not prove that the person responsible could not understand right from wrong. And in this case, prosecutors said, the clearest evidence of Letitia's understanding came after the attack. Whatever chaos existed in Gannon's bedroom was followed by organized concealment. They also returned to Letitia's digital searches. Those searches repeatedly expressed resentment toward Al and frustration over caring for his children. She described herself as a glorified babysitter. She searched for a new husband and for a man without children. She complained that she was doing the work while Gannon's biological mother was not helping. The prosecution offered those searches as possible evidence of motive, not proof that frustration inevitably leads to violence. It does not. But evidence of the emotional environment Letitia had created in the period before Gannon's death. She felt burdened. She felt ignored by Al. And she directed part of that resentment toward the responsibility of caring for his children. Then prosecutors brought the case back from psychological theory to physical evidence. Jurors saw Gannon's damaged shirt and jacket. They saw the pillow with 2 bullet holes. They were shown the bullet recovered from his head. The exhibits were difficult, but their purpose was not simply to shock. They forced jurors to confront the act at the center of all the diagnoses interviews, and competing expert opinions. An 11-year-old child had been killed by the person responsible for protecting him. Now the jury had to decide what the cover-up meant. Was it the work of someone detached from reality, moving through fractured identities without understanding the nature or wrongfulness of her actions? Or was it the work of someone who understood exactly what had happened and urgently began constructing distance from it? On May 8th, 2023, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its answer. Letitia Stotch was found guilty of first-degree murder after deliberation, guilty of first-degree murder of a child under 12 by a person in a position of trust, guilty of tampering with a deceased human body, and guilty of tampering with physical evidence. The jury had rejected the insanity defense on every count. For the first time since Gannon disappeared, the court had delivered a complete legal answer. Letitia had killed him. She had understood that what she was doing was wrong, and she was criminally responsible. The judge called Letitia the worst monster he had encountered and imposed the maximum punishment. But a problem had already entered the courtroom before the first witness ever testified. It was sitting in the jury box. The evidence was not what overturned Letitia's conviction. The problem was a family connection disclosed during jury selection and allowed to remain in plain sight. But before that courtroom error surfaced, the 2023 trial appeared to end with complete clarity. On Monday, May 8th, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned 4 guilty verdicts. Letitia Stotch was found guilty of first-degree murder after deliberation, guilty of first-degree murder of a child under 12 by a person in a position of trust, guilty of tampering with a deceased human body, and guilty of tampering with physical evidence. The insanity defense had failed. The jurors had heard the conflicting psychiatric opinions. They had heard that Letitia displayed traits associated with personality disorders. They had also heard the defense claim that a separate personality named Maria had killed Gannon, while Letitia was psychotic and unable to distinguish right from wrong. Then they looked at what happened after Gannon's death. The altered crime scene, the missing bedding, the rental vehicles, the movement of his body, the changing stories. Eduardo, Quincy Brown, the false explanations for the blood, the repeated attempts to direct investigators toward imaginary abductors, even the effort to obtain fabricated polygraph results. Whatever the jurors thought about Letitia's mental health in a broader sense, they rejected the specific legal claim that she had been insane when she killed Gannon. Her conduct showed planning, awareness, and concealment. She had not behaved like someone who did not understand that a crime had occurred. She had behaved like someone trying desperately to prevent others from proving it. 4 counts. 4 guilty verdicts. For Gannon's parents, however, the verdict was not the end of the proceeding. They still had to stand in the courtroom and explain what had been taken from them. Victim impact statements are not another stage of proving guilt. By that point, guilt has already been decided. They give the people left behind an opportunity to tell the court what the crime meant beyond autopsy findings, phone records, vehicle data, and legal arguments. Gannon's parents asked the judge to impose the maximum punishment available. Al also asked that Letitia be stripped of the Stotch surname. That request was not a separate criminal sentence, and it was not presented as though changing a name could add anything measurable to a prison term. Its meaning was emotional. Stotch was Gannon's family name. Al did not want the woman convicted of murdering his son to continue sharing it with the child she had betrayed. Think about what that request says without Al having to spell out every part of it. The trial had already forced Gannon's family to hear his final injuries described in court. They had seen physical evidence connected to his death displayed before strangers. They had listened while the defense argued that the person responsible was not legally accountable because another identity had taken control. And after all of that, Al was asking for one more separation. Do not let her carry Gannon's name. When the judge addressed Letitia, he did not accept the defense's explanation of her conduct. He told her that she had betrayed her stepson. Gannon was a child in her care. He depended on her. He trusted her to protect him. Instead, the person occupying that position of trust took his life and then made repeated, conscious decisions to hide what she had done. The judge focused on that sequence because it went directly to the insanity claim. Letitia's actions did not stop at the moment of the killing. The concealment continued through the minutes, hours, and days that followed. She moved Gannon's body. She attempted to clean evidence from the home. She gave investigators false accounts. She used vehicles in ways that prosecutors argued were intended to distance herself from the physical evidence. She transported Gannon across state lines and left him inside a suitcase beneath a Florida bridge. The judge's point was blunt. There was no moment during that prolonged cover-up when Letitia appeared confused about why she was carrying a child's body and luggage. Her decisions had a clear purpose: hide the crime, explain away the evidence, avoid responsibility. He also said that using an unsupported mental health claim in that way was a disservice to people who live with genuine mental illness. That distinction matters. The court was not saying that mental illness is never real, never serious, or never legally relevant. It was finding that Letitia's conduct did not support the particular defense she had presented. The judge described the case as the most horrific he had encountered across hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal matters. He then imposed the maximum punishment available under Colorado law for the murder conviction: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additional consecutive terms followed for the remaining convictions. There was no parole date waiting somewhere in the distance. No point at which Letitia could argue that she had served enough time for Gannon's murder. The sentence was meant to keep her in prison for the rest of her life. And for a while, that appeared to be the final legal answer. Nothing could restore Gannon's life. A conviction could not return him to his parents or erase what the family had been forced to learn. But the verdict gave them something the investigation alone could not: a formal judgment, reached by a jury, that Letitia was legally responsible. The sentence appeared to make that judgment permanent. The family had every reason to believe they would never again have to sit through another opening statement, another psychiatric evaluation, another display of physical evidence, or another defense argument about what happened inside Letitia's mind. Then came April 2nd, 2026. More than 6 years after Gannon was killed, the Colorado Court of Appeals overturned Letitia's conviction and ordered a new trial. Not because new forensic testing had excluded her, not because another suspect had been identified, not because the appellate court found the prosecution's evidence insufficient. The conviction was reversed because one of the jurors was the father-in-law of a person employed by the district attorney's office. And here's the part that makes the error so difficult to understand. The juror did not hide that relationship. He disclosed it during jury selection. The prosecutor knew. The trial judge knew. The connection was discussed before the jury heard the case, yet the juror was still permitted to serve. Jury selection can look like a preliminary step before the real trial begins. It is not. An impartial jury is one of the foundations that makes the rest of the trial legally valid. The evidence may be overwhelming. The arguments may be persuasive. Every witness may testify exactly as expected. But if the jury itself is not selected according to the constitutional and procedural rules governing impartiality, the verdict can remain vulnerable. The appellate court concluded that this juror should have been removed because of his family relationship to an employee of the office prosecuting Letitia. That did not require proof that the juror had secretly coordinated with prosecutors. It did not require a finding that he deliberately manipulated the other jurors. And it did not mean the relative employed by the district attorney's office had worked directly on the case. The issue was whether a person with that connection should have been seated at all. According to the appellate ruling, the answer was no. Because the error affected the composition and impartiality of the jury itself, the court determined that the conviction could not stand. The legal remedy was reversal and a new trial. That distinction is critical. An appellate court can overturn a conviction for different reasons, and those reasons do not all mean the same thing. Sometimes evidence is ruled legally insufficient, meaning the prosecution failed to prove the charge. Sometimes newly discovered evidence undermines the factual basis of the case. Sometimes misconduct damages the reliability of the verdict. That was not the finding here. The ruling did not declare Letitia innocent. It did not say she had been wrongly identified. It did not hold that the blood evidence, vehicle evidence, digital records, false statements, or recovery of Gannon's body were too weak to support a conviction. It said the trial had been compromised by a jury selection error. So the practical result is almost painfully technical. The conviction was vacated, but the murder charges did not disappear. The case moved back into an unresolved posture, with the possibility that prosecutors would have to present it to another jury. Letitia did not simply walk out of prison when the ruling was issued. She remains behind bars while the legal process continues. A reversed conviction can change the legal foundation for someone's confinement, but it does not necessarily mean immediate release when active charges, further review, and retrial proceedings remain. The prosecution appealed to the Colorado Supreme Court. From there, the case could take several paths. The state's highest court could reverse the appellate decision and restore the original conviction. It could agree that the juror should not have served and leave the order for a new trial in place. Or it could decline to hear the case, allowing the appellate ruling to stand without further review. If either of the last two things happens, the prosecution may have to try Letitia again, and a second trial would raise questions that do not yet have answers. Will the defense again argue that Letitia was legally insane? Will it return to dissociative identity disorder and the claim that another personality killed Gannon? Which psychologists and psychiatrists will testify again? Will the same experts stand by the same conclusions years later? Prosecutors would also have to rebuild the case for a new jury. The physical evidence would remain, but it would need to be introduced again. Investigators would again explain the blood in Gannon's bedroom, the evidence in the garage and vehicles, the rental car timeline, Letitia's movements, her searches, and her shifting stories. Witnesses may have to return to court. Gannon's parents may once again hear the details of their son's death discussed as disputed evidence rather than settled fact. That is the human cost hidden inside the phrase new trial. Al said he was torn by the possibility of repeating the process, but his resolve had not changed. His demand for justice had not changed. And, most importantly, his love for Gannon had not changed. He said he believed the result would ultimately be the same, even though the family did not want to travel this road again. That response carries more restraint than the situation deserves, because this entire case began with an immense search for a missing child. It became a multi-state homicide investigation. Detectives worked through physical evidence, phone records, surveillance footage, rental vehicles, fabricated stories, and the recovery of Gannon's body 1,400 miles from home. A jury then heard weeks of testimony and returned unanimous guilty verdicts. Yet all of that was placed in jeopardy not by newly discovered forensic doubt, but by a decision made openly during jury selection. Everyone knew about the relationship. The juror disclosed it. The prosecutor knew it. The judge knew it. And he remained on the jury anyway. That is how we return to the question running through this case. If the evidence was strong enough to convince one jury, how did a preventable courtroom error place Gannon's family back at the beginning? The answer is that evidence alone does not make a conviction legally durable. The process matters too. It has to matter, even in a case where the facts appear overwhelming, because rules protecting an impartial jury cannot exist only for defendants the public believes might be innocent. But knowing that does not make the consequence easier to accept. If there is another trial, it will not mean the appellate court found Letitia innocent. It will mean the state must prove the case again before a jury whose impartiality cannot be challenged in the same way. In 2023, three things briefly aligned: factual certainty in the minds of Gannon's family and investigators, a unanimous jury verdict, and a conviction that appeared legally final. They no longer do. The evidence remains. The original verdict has been undone. The lasting legal outcome is still being decided. So as this case moves toward the Colorado Supreme Court, and possibly toward a second jury, keep the final image where it belongs. Not on Letitia, on Gannon's photographs. On the little boy his parents described as gifted, loving, and determined from the day he was born. On Landon calling him her hero. On Al saying that his love for his son will never fail. Do you believe the original conviction should be restored? Or is a new trial the necessary price of protecting the right to an impartial jury, even in a case like this one? Tell me what you think in the comments. Subscribe and follow the case, because the next ruling may determine whether Gannon's family can finally leave the courtroom, or whether they will be asked to walk into it all over again.